The iron gates of Marion Correctional Facility slowly opened at 7 a.m. on March 15, 2024. Laura Carson walked free with a single plastic bag in her hands containing all her possessions: a faded photograph of her sister, letters from her first 2 years in prison, and $127, her release allowance from the state of Ohio. The 45-year-old woman looked older than her age. 14 years behind bars had left their mark. Prematurely gray hair pulled back into a tight ponytail, deep wrinkles around eyes that once laughed, and the tense gait of someone accustomed to constantly looking over their shoulder. Her prison uniform had been replaced by simple clothes from the prison thrift store, a gray jacket and worn jeans. The bus to Millfield left at 9. Laura spent 2 hours waiting at the Marion bus station, trying to get used to the sounds of the free world. Children laughing, car horns honking, people talking, people who could go anywhere and anytime. After 14 years of regimented life, this cacophony seemed deafening. On the bus, she took a seat by the window in the back row, a habit developed over years of confinement. Always keep your back protected. Always see who is coming and going. The Ohio landscape slowly changed outside the window. The industrial areas of Marion gave way to farm fields, then small towns with their characteristic water towers and church steeples. Each mile brought her closer to Millfield, a town of 8,000 where she was born, raised, married, and arrested at the age of 31. The town she left in handcuffs in 2010, leaving behind a ruined life and her younger sister Matilda, who promised to wait and write. The letters stopped after 2 years. The bus arrived in Millfield at 1:30 in the afternoon. The bus station, if the tiny stop near the gas station could be called that, hadn't changed. The same faded bench, the same smell of gasoline and fried food from the roadside diner. But everything else seemed different. The main street, which she remembered as lively and noisy, now gaped with empty shop windows. Millfield Motors, the car dealership where her father had worked before retiring, was closed. In its place was a for sale sign. The textile factory where Laura had worked for 10 years before her arrest had been demolished. In its place stood a small shopping center with a mega market supermarket. Laura walked slowly along the familiar streets, each step bringing her closer to 412 Maple Street, the house she had shared with her husband, Omar Morgan, until that fateful day in November 2010. The house she hoped was still waiting for her return. The 2-story colonial-style house looked better than when she had left it. A new roof, fresh paint, a well-manicured lawn. A new Ford pickup truck and a small Honda sedan were parked in the driveway. A children's swing set, which had never been there before, swayed on the porch. Laura stopped at the gate, feeling her heart pounding in her chest. Something was wrong, very wrong. She pressed the doorbell. A few seconds later, the door opened, and Laura saw a face she hadn't seen in 14 years, the face of her younger sister, Matilda. But this was not the 20-year-old girl she had left behind. This was a 35-year-old woman with short brown hair and tired eyes. "Laura?" Matilda's voice was barely audible. "Hi, Maddie." Laura tried to smile, using her sister's childhood nickname. "I'm back." Matilda didn't move. She stood in the doorway, holding the doorframe so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Behind her, she heard quick footsteps and a man's voice. "Maddie? Who's there?" Omar Morgan appeared in the doorway behind Matilda. The 47-year-old man had hardly changed over the years. Still the same dark hair with gray at the temples, still the same broad builder's frame, still the same confident expression. The only things that had changed were the wedding ring on his finger and the hand he placed on Matilda's shoulder in a protective gesture. Time stood still. The three people looked at each other in silence, each aware of the significance of the moment in their own way. Laura felt her world crumbling beneath her feet for the second time in her life. "Laura." Omar was the first to break the silence. His voice was even, cautious. We didn't know you were coming out today. I wrote. Laura looked at Matilda. I sent a letter 3 weeks ago. Matilda lowered her eyes. We got it. Apparently, we should have replied. Laura's sarcasm was barely noticeable, but all three heard it. A child's voice came from deep inside the house. Mom, who's here? A 13-year-old girl with Omar's dark hair and Matilda's green eyes appeared in the hallway, peeking curiously from behind the adults. Emma, go up to your room, Matilda said quickly. But Mom, now. The girl reluctantly disappeared upstairs. The sound of her footsteps on the stairs was the only sound in the ensuing silence. Would you like to come in? Matilda offered reluctantly. Laura entered the house that had once been her home. Everything had changed. Her furniture was gone, replaced by new pieces. The walls had been repainted. Family photos of Laura and Omar had been replaced by pictures of Omar, Matilda, and their daughter. The only thing that remained the same was the smell. The very smell of home that she had remembered in her dreams for 14 years. Please sit down, Matilda said, pointing to the sofa. They sat in the living room like strangers at a business meeting. When? Laura asked, looking at the wedding rings on their fingers. Laura, Omar began. When? She repeated more sharply. 2 years ago, Matilda replied quietly. But we've been together for 8 years. Laura closed her eyes and took a deep breath. 8 years. That meant they had started dating when she had served only 6 of her 14 years, when she still hoped that Omar was waiting for her, when she still believed Matilda's letters about how hard it was for her alone. Laura, please understand, Matilda's voice trembled. It just happened. We didn't plan it. After what happened to you, it was very hard for me. Omar helped me deal with my debts, with the house. We spent a lot of time together and... Debts? Laura opened her eyes. What debts? The lawyers were very expensive, Omar interjected. Your defense. I had to mortgage the house, take out a loan. After the verdict, I lost my job at the construction company. I had to start my own business from scratch. You mortgaged the house to pay for a lawyer? Laura's voice sounded incredulous. Of course. You were my wife. Were, he corrected himself. Laura looked at them both. Omar sat upright, his posture expressing righteous defense. Matilda curled up in her chair, avoiding her sister's gaze. Between them was an invisible wall of 8 years of living together, shared memories, and a child they had raised together. Where can I stay? Laura asked. I mean, until I find something permanent. There are rooms available at the motel on the highway, Omar replied quickly. Nice rooms. Not expensive. I'll pay, Matilda added. For the first week. It's the least I can do, Laura stood up. No need. I have money. Laura, wait. Matilda stood up too. I need to explain to you. What exactly? Laura turned to her sister. That you slept with my husband while I was in prison for what he did? That you had his baby? That you took my house and my life? I didn't know, Matilda cried. I didn't know you were innocent. The words hung in the air like an accusation. Omar stood up abruptly. Laura was found guilty by a jury. His voice became cold. She was caught with drugs in her car. Her fingerprints were on the package. Because you asked me to move it from the trunk to the glove compartment, Laura turned to her ex-husband. You said it was work documents. You have no proof. Not yet. Those 2 words sounded like a threat. Omar stepped forward, but Matilda grabbed his arm. Laura, please, she pleaded. Emma doesn't know anything. To her, you're a stranger. Don't ruin her life. What about my life? Laura asked quietly. 14 years of my life are worth nothing? No one answered. Laura headed for the door. At the threshold, she turned around. I'm not going anywhere, she said. This is my town, too. It used to be my home, too. And the truth belongs to me, too. The door closed behind her with a soft click. The Mill River Motel on Highway 23 was exactly as Omar had described it, inexpensive and clean. Laura rented a room for a week for $280, leaving herself less than $50 in cash. The room was small but cozy. A bed, a TV, a tiny bathroom, a mini fridge. The window overlooked the parking lot and the highway beyond. She sat down on the bed and allowed herself to cry for the first time that day. For 14 years, she had dreamed of returning home. For 14 years, she had imagined how Omar would welcome her, how they would start all over again. How Matilda would hug her and tell her everything that had happened during her absence. Reality turned out to be harsher than any nightmare. The next morning, Laura went looking for a job. Millfield had changed a lot in 14 years, but some things remained the same. Diner Joe's was still open, although under a new name, Family Cafe. The bank on the corner of Main and Maple had become a branch of a large chain. The library had closed, and the building had been turned into a second-hand store. The Family Cafe needed a dishwasher. The supermarket needed a night shift cleaner. The Golden Years nursing home needed a nurse. Laura left applications everywhere, honestly stating that she had spent 14 years in prison. Everywhere she went, she was politely told that they would be in touch. By the end of the day, she had $28 left and the realization that news travels fast in a small town. Too fast. The third day at the Mill River Motel began with a phone call at 6:30 in the morning. Laura woke up to the sharp sound. After 14 years in prison, her sleep had become light, and any unexpected noise instantly put her on alert. "Miss Carson? This is Deborah Wilkins from Millfield High School. Did you submit an application for the cleaning position?" Laura sat up in bed, trying to sound cheerful. "Yes, of course. Can you come in for an interview at 9 o'clock today? We have an opening on the night shift." The night shift meant working from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., cleaning classrooms after school, and preparing the building for the next school day. It also meant minimal interaction with people, exactly what Laura needed right now. Millfield High School was located in the same red brick building Laura remembered, but with a new addition and a modern sports field. Deborah Wilkins, the assistant principal for operations, turned out to be a middle-aged woman with a practical short haircut and a business-like approach to hiring. The interview was brief. Wilkins asked directly about her criminal record, and Laura answered honestly. The woman nodded as if she had expected that answer. "In our town, everyone knows everything about everyone else," she said without judgment. "What's important is that you're willing to work. Night shifts are hard to fill, especially with conscientious people. Start tomorrow. The rate is $8 an hour, 40 hours a week. $320 a week before taxes. That would be enough for a motel, food, and gradually saving up for a rental apartment." For the first time in 3 days, Laura felt something like relief. She spent the rest of the day exploring the changed Millfield. Walking around town became a painful journey into the past. Every street, every building carried memories of her life before her arrest. Here was the pharmacy where she had bought medicine for her mother before she died. Here was the park where she and Omar had met as teenagers. Here was the Iron Horse Bar, where they had celebrated their wedding with 20 close friends. The bar had closed. In its place was now a religious bookstore. By evening, Laura had reached the cemetery on the outskirts of town. Her mother's grave was well tended, with fresh flowers and a clean monument. Matilda had taken care of it for 14 years. Laura stood in front of the grave, imagining what her mother would say about what was happening. Mary Carson had always been a wise woman, able to find the right words in difficult situations. "What should I do, Mom?" Laura whispered. "How can I live with what they've done?" The wind rustled the leaves of the old oak tree above the grave, but there was no answer. Returning to the motel at dusk, Laura noticed a familiar Honda in the supermarket parking lot. Matilda was leaving the store with shopping bags, followed by 13-year-old Emma. The girl was talking excitedly to her mother, waving her arms. It was a normal family scene, one Laura had witnessed hundreds of times before her imprisonment. Only now, she was an outside observer. Matilda looked up and saw her sister. Their eyes met across the parking lot. Emma also noticed her aunt and fell silent. The family froze near the car, unsure how to react to the encounter. Laura moved closer. Matilda looked tired, dark circles under her eyes, tense posture. Emma hid a book behind her back, as if she didn't want her aunt to see it. "Hi," Laura said. "Hi," Matilda replied. "How are you? Did you find a job?" "At the school. As a night shift cleaner. That's good." "Very good." An awkward pause hung between the sisters. Emma shifted from foot to foot, clearly wishing she were anywhere but there. "Emma, get in the car," Matilda said quietly. "Mom, please." The girl reluctantly got into the car, but left the window slightly open. The sisters were left alone. "Laura, I need to talk to you," Matilda fidgeted nervously with the handles of the bags. "Not here. Can we meet tomorrow? At a cafe?" "What about?" "About what happened. About why it turned out this way. You deserve an explanation." Laura looked at her sister for a long time. In Matilda's face, she saw the same 20-year-old girl who had cried in court when the verdict was announced, who had promised to visit every week and write every day, who had disappeared from her life after 2 years of silent betrayal. "Tomorrow at 2 o'clock at the family cafe." Matilda nodded and quickly got into the car. Emma asked her mother something, but Laura couldn't hear the answer. The Honda drove away, leaving her alone in the empty parking lot. Her first night at work at the school passed in a rhythm familiar from her prison routine. A clear schedule, specific tasks, no one around. Laura washed the floors, cleaned the classrooms, emptied the trash cans. The mechanical work was calming. Her hands were busy, but her mind could wander, and wander in November 2010. At that time, Omar was working as a building contractor, fulfilling orders for local residents and small companies. Business was going well, but not great. Laura worked in a textile factory, and their combined income allowed them to live modestly but with dignity. They planned to have children, discussed renovating their home, and dreamed of a future together. In October 2010, Omar began receiving large orders from new customers. There was so much work that he hired 2 assistants and bought new tools. He explained his sudden success by attributing it to recommendations from satisfied customers. But Laura noticed something strange. Clients called at odd hours. Omar often went to meetings late at night or early in the morning. Some jobs were paid in cash, without official contracts. When Laura asked about it, Omar replied that it was easier for clients that way. Less bureaucracy, faster results. In November, everything changed overnight. Laura was returning from a late shift at the factory. Omar asked her to take a bag of documents from the trunk of his car and put it in the glove compartment. He had to drive to a new client in the morning, and it was inconvenient to look for papers in the dark. It was a simple request that his wife had fulfilled hundreds of times. The bag was heavier than usual. Laura didn't open it. Trust in their marriage was absolute. She transferred the documents as her husband had asked and went home to have dinner. 2 hours later, police cars pulled up outside the house. Traces of cocaine were found in the trunk. In the glove compartment, there were 2 kilograms of heroin in packages with Laura's fingerprints. Under the seat, there was $20,000 in cash and a notebook with names and phone numbers. Omar swore he knew nothing. He said the car could have been broken into while it was parked at the construction site. He claimed that the notebook wasn't his and that the money was payment for legal work from clients who preferred to pay in cash. His testimony sounded convincing to everyone except Laura. She remembered every detail of that night. She remembered how strange Omar had been, nervous, constantly looking out the window, insisting that she transfer the package right then and there. She remembered his relief when she was arrested and his feigned panic in front of everyone else. At the trial, the lawyer Omar hired built his defense on the fact that Laura was an unwitting participant in a criminal scheme, that she didn't know about the contents of the bag and was acting at her husband's request. The strategy might have worked if it weren't for the physical evidence. Her fingerprints on the drug packages and the testimony of 3 witnesses who saw her frequently transferring packages from her husband's trunk. The jury did not believe in her innocence. 14 years for large-scale drug trafficking. Omar visited her for the first 6 months. He talked about plans to appeal the sentence, swore his love, promised to wait. Gradually, the visits became less frequent, and after a year, they stopped altogether. He filed for divorce 2 years later, by mail through a lawyer. Matilda wrote letters for the first 2 years. She talked about her job as a cashier in a supermarket, how Omar was helping her deal with her family's debts, and her relationship with a young man named Jason. Then the letters became shorter, less frequent, more formal. The last one arrived at Christmas 2012, a card wishing her good health and saying that life was getting better. Laura didn't know that life was getting better with her husband. Dawn found her in an empty chemistry classroom where she was wiping down tables and thinking about justice. For 14 years, she had believed that the worst was behind her, that prison was rock bottom, and from there, things could only get better. Now she realized she had been naive. The betrayal of those close to her turned out to be more painful than the years of imprisonment. At 6:30 in the morning, Laura finished work and took the bus to the motel. The driver, an elderly man with kind eyes, greeted her and did not ask about her night shift. In a small town, bus drivers knew all their passengers and their stories, but sometimes they were tactful. At the motel, Laura took a shower, had cereal with milk for breakfast, and tried to sleep. Sleep did not come. Questions swirled in her head, questions she wanted answers to when she met with Matilda. When exactly did their relationship with Omar begin? Had they planned it from the beginning? Did Matilda know the truth about who was really dealing drugs? And most importantly, how many more betrayals would she discover in her hometown? At 1 o'clock in the afternoon, Laura woke up hungry and troubled by her dreams. She had an hour before meeting her sister. She put on the best clothes from her modest wardrobe, clean jeans and a light-colored shirt, and headed to the family cafe. Matilda was already waiting at a corner table, nervously stirring her coffee. She, too, was dressed carefully, in a blue dress that Laura didn't remember. In 13 years, her younger sister had grown to look more respectable and confident. Motherhood and marriage had changed her for the better, if not for the circumstances of their relationship. "Thank you for coming," Matilda said when Laura sat down across from her. The waitress, a girl in her 20s whom Laura didn't recognize, brought the menu. Laura ordered coffee and a sandwich. It was difficult to eat in Matilda's presence, but her body needed food after a sleepless night. "I don't know where to start," Matilda admitted. "Start with when you started dating my husband." Matilda flinched at the directness of the question. 4 years after your trial, 2014, but not the way you think." "How then?" "He was helping me with my mother's house. After she died, I had to sort through her things and sell the furniture. I couldn't do it alone. Omar offered to help." Laura listened silently. Her mother had died of cancer in 2013. Laura was allowed to attend the funeral under escort, 2 hours in handcuffs next to the grave, then back to prison. Matilda cried and promised that everything would be fine, that she would take care of everything. "We spent a lot of time at Mom's house. We talked about childhood, about you, about how everything had changed. Omar was very upset about the divorce. He said he couldn't forgive himself for not being able to help you." "And you believed him?" "I wanted to believe him. I was lonely, Laura. Very lonely. Work, home, my mother's grave, no friends, no relationships. Everyone in town knew I was the sister of a prisoner. It left its mark." The waitress brought their order. Laura mechanically ate her sandwich, not tasting anything. Matilda continued to justify herself, explaining how she had accidentally become close to Omar, how their friendship had grown into something more. "And when did you realize you were in love with him?" Laura asked. "I don't know exactly. It happened gradually. He was the only one who understood my pain, who knew you as well as I did." "And when did you start living together?" "In 2016, he sold your house and bought a new one. I moved in with him. So her house had been sold while she was in prison, another loss she didn't know about." "And Emma?" "She was born in 2017. We hadn't planned it so soon, but—" Matilda fell silent. "But you wanted to create a real family to replace the one that had been destroyed?" Matilda lowered her eyes. Her silence was her answer. "Matilda," Laura's voice became quieter but not softer. "Did you ever suspect that Omar was lying? That he was actually dealing drugs, not me?" Her older sister raised her head. Laura saw fear in her eyes. "What are you talking about?" "You know what I'm talking about. You weren't stupid at 20. You saw how his lifestyle changed before my arrest. You saw the money, you saw the strange clients." "Laura, don't. I have to. 14 years of my life is too high a price to pay for your happiness." Matilda got up from the table. "I'm not going to listen to this. Omar is innocent. The court acquitted him. The court convicted me. That doesn't mean justice prevailed." Matilda put $10 on the table and headed for the exit. At the door, she turned around. "Leave us alone, Laura. Please. We have a daughter. We have a life. I had a life too." The cafe door closed, leaving Laura alone with her half-eaten sandwich and the bitter realization that her sister had chosen sides long ago. For the next 2 weeks, Laura lived a life of night shifts and daytime sleep, gradually adjusting to her new reality. The school corridors became familiar, and work became routine. She avoided places where she might run into Matilda or Omar, shopped at a small store on the outskirts of town, and ate at a cheap diner near the gas station. But in a town with a population of 8,000, it was impossible to avoid encounters entirely. On Saturday morning, on her way back from work, Laura saw Omar's familiar pickup truck near the bank on Main Street. On impulse, she decided to go inside. She needed to open an account for her salary, and it was a good opportunity to find out how successful her ex-husband's business had become in 14 years. Omar was standing at the manager's desk, discussing some documents with a young woman in a business suit. There was a folder with papers on the table, and Laura caught a glimpse of the amounts, which made her gasp. A $500,000 loan to expand his construction business. He noticed her as he turned toward the exit. For a second, a flicker of alarm crossed his eyes, then his face became impenetrable. They parted without saying hello, but Laura remembered the main thing. Omar Morgan now had a very successful business. Too successful for a man who, in 2010, was struggling to make ends meet and took out a loan to pay his wife's lawyer. On Monday evening, as she was getting ready for the night shift, Laura received an unexpected visit. There was a knock on the motel room door around 10 o'clock. She opened it and saw 13-year-old Emma Morgan with a backpack on her back. The girl looked confused and determined at the same time. Her dark hair was braided, and her green eyes, and an exact copy of her mother's, looked serious and direct. "Can I come in?" "I need to talk to you." Laura hesitated. Talking to Omar and Matilda's child could lead to new conflicts, but curiosity got the better of her. "How did you get here?" "By bike. Mom thinks I'm doing my homework at the library." Emma sat down on the only chair in the room and put her backpack on her lap. Laura sat down on the edge of the bed, not knowing what to expect from this conversation. "They're fighting because of you," the girl said without preamble. "Every night. They think I can't hear them, but the walls are thin." "What are they arguing about?" "Mom wants Dad to talk to you, to ask you to leave town. Dad says you'll leave on your own when you realize you don't belong here." Laura looked closely at her niece. Emma was a smart kid, that was obvious, and mature enough to understand the complexity of the situation. "What do you think?" "I think Mom is afraid of you." but I don't know why Emma opened her backpack and took out her school history textbook. We're studying the judicial system. I read about how courts work, about the presumption of innocence and evidence. The girl paused. Mom says you committed a crime. But if that's true, why is she so nervous? The question hung in the air. Laura knew she was on dangerous ground. Whatever she said would affect the child and her relationship with her parents. Sometimes the truth is more complicated than it seems, she replied cautiously. Are you innocent? A direct question from a 13-year-old girl. Laura looked into eyes that reminded her of Matilda's when they were children. Honest, open, thirsty for justice. Yes. Does Dad know about this? Yes. Emma nodded, as if her suspicions had been confirmed. I thought so. He acts differently when someone mentions your name. He gets tense. Mom doesn't notice it, but I do. The girl put her textbook in her backpack and stood up. Don't tell my parents I came here. I just needed to know the truth. After Emma left, Laura sat in the silence of the motel room for a long time. The conversation with her niece made her look at the situation in a new light. If even a child could sense the lies and tension, then the facade of Omar's happy family was not as solid as it seemed. The next day, Laura decided to take action. Her old acquaintances avoided meeting her, but the town was small, and some people were willing to talk, especially those who had a bone to pick with Omar Morgan. Jim Parker, the owner of a small construction company, was one such person. In 2011, immediately after Laura's arrest, Omar began to poach his clients by offering lower prices. Jim's company barely survived, and he hadn't forgotten. They met in his office, a small room above a hardware store. Jim, a 50-year-old man with a builder's hands and tired eyes, listened to Laura attentively. I always suspected something was wrong, he admitted. In 2010, Omar's business was going badly. He was barely making ends meet. And then suddenly, he had money for new equipment, assistants, advertising. After my arrest? No, before. A month or two before the arrest, he suddenly started getting big orders. He said that customers were recommending him to their friends, but it was strange. In our business, reputation is built over years, but for him, it all happened in a couple of months. Jim took an old folder with documents out of the safe. I was trying to figure out what was going on. I watched his work and wrote down the license plate numbers of his customers. I thought about filing a complaint about unfair competition. He handed Laura a sheet of paper. These are the numbers. Some cars came to him at night, several times a week. Laura studied the list. Most of the numbers meant nothing to her, but one seemed familiar. She remembered a red Mustang with those numbers. It had appeared near their house several times in October 2010. Did you check these numbers? I tried, but I don't have any connections in the police. And then you were arrested, and it became clear where Omar got his money. Everyone decided that he had just gotten lucky after his criminal past. What did you think? Jim paused, choosing his words carefully. I thought he was too smart to let his wife keep the evidence. And too sneaky not to take advantage of the situation. Laura asked for a copy of the list of numbers. Jim made a copy on the old copier without hesitation. Good luck, he said. Some people in this town remember who you were. Honest. Fair. If you're innocent, you deserve the truth. That evening, Laura approached Detective Michael Rodriguez at the police station. The 52-year-old officer with graying hair and attentive eyes listened to her story and studied the list of numbers. This is interesting, he acknowledged. But 14 years have passed. Most of these cars have long since been sold or scrapped, but the records remain? Possibly. I can check the database. Rodriguez looked at her intently. But you understand that this won't change your status? The verdict is final. Even if new evidence is found, the procedure for reviewing the case is very complicated. I understand. But I need the truth. The truth is sometimes a dangerous thing, especially when it involves influential people. Is Omar an influential person? He has a successful business, good connections at City Hall, and he donates money to school programs. Any charges against him would need to be backed up by solid evidence. Rodriguez promised to check the numbers and contact her if he found anything interesting. 3 days later, he called the motel. A fee. I found something. The red Mustang belonged to Rick Davison, a small-time drug dealer. He was sentenced to 8 years in 2011. He was released in 2019 and moved to another state. Can you contact him? I already have. He's willing to talk. For money. How much? $500. Laura had $300 saved up. She had to find the rest, but the information was worth it. The meeting with Rick Davidson was scheduled for Saturday at a neutral location, a gas station cafe in a nearby town. The 38-year-old man with prison tattoos on his arms and wary eyes got straight to the point. Omar Morgan was one of my customers in 2010. A regular customer, he bought large quantities for resale. Do you have any proof? I destroyed the records a long time ago, but I remember the details. He bought heroin and cocaine and said he had reliable sales channels through construction workers. Rick explained how the scheme worked. Omar received the drugs, packed them into construction materials, and transported them around the area under the guise of work trips. He laundered the money from the sales through his construction business, recording fictitious orders from non-existent customers. He was careful. He never kept the goods at home, always in his car or at construction sites. He said his wife knew nothing, that to her he was just a regular construction worker. And what happened in November 2010? A major police operation began. Someone from our group leaked the information. Omar panicked and said he was closing the business. A week later, I found out that his wife had been arrested. Rick paused, sipping his coffee. I knew right away that he had set her up. It was a smart move. Who would suspect a husband who lost his wife to drugs? Why did you remain silent in court? I had my own problems. Plus, Omar paid me to keep quiet. $10,000 and a promise that the police wouldn't find any connection between us. Laura recorded Rick's testimony on a tape recorder she borrowed from a library in a neighboring town. The recording had no legal value, but it could serve as a basis for further investigation. Returning to Millfield, Laura felt a mixture of satisfaction and anxiety. The truth was gradually coming to light, but she knew that Omar would not passively wait to be exposed. Her fears were confirmed the next day. On Monday morning, when Laura was returning from the night shift, Omar was waiting for her near the motel. He stood next to his pickup truck with his arms crossed over his chest. His face was grim. I've been told you're asking questions. His voice was quiet, but threatening. I have a right to ask questions. You don't have the right to destroy my family. They stood in the motel parking lot in the morning light, two people whose lives had been tragically intertwined 14 years ago. You ruined my life, Omar. 14 years. You had no choice. I had a business, debts, plans. You just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. The candor of his cynical admission struck Laura more than any threats. So, you don't deny it? Between us? Why? You can't prove anything anyway. Too much time has passed, too many people have disappeared. Omar took a step closer. But I'll give you some advice. Stop digging. Leave town. Start a new life somewhere else. You don't belong here. What if I don't want to leave? Then you'll regret that decision. The threat was clear and unambiguous. Omar got into his pickup truck and drove away, leaving Laura alone in the empty parking lot. That evening, Laura received a phone call from Deborah Wilkins at the school. Laura, I'm very sorry, but we have to terminate your employment. We've received complaints from parents of students. What complaints? Some parents are concerned about having someone with a criminal record at the school. I know it's unfair, but the administration can't ignore the parents' opinions. Laura knew Omar was behind the complaints. He had connections in town, influence, money. He wouldn't physically threaten her in the parking lot, Instead, he took away her job and her livelihood. 2 days later, the money for the motel ran out. Laura moved into her car, an old sedan she had bought with her last savings. Millfield was no longer her home. It had become a battlefield where she found herself alone against a man who had already destroyed her life once and was ready to do it again. But Laura wasn't going to give up. 14 years of imprisonment had taught her patience and perseverance. She knew that Omar had weaknesses, that his success was built on lies that would sooner or later come to light. The only thing she didn't know was the price she would have to pay for the truth. Tuesday, May 14th, 2024, began as a normal day for the Morgan family. Omar left for the construction site at 7 in the morning. Matilda took Emma to school and went to work at the supermarket. None of them suspected that this day would be the last in their normal lives. Laura spent the night in her car in the parking lot of a 24-hour gas station outside the city, trying to figure out what to do next. She was out of money, out of work, and had to leave the motel. She slept fitfully, waking up at every sound. Life as a homeless person was a harsh reality that she had not experienced even in prison. In the morning, she went to the city library, where she could spend time for free, use the restroom, and drink water. The librarian, an elderly woman named Dorothy, asked no questions, although she clearly understood Laura's situation. In a small town, there are no such secrets. Laura spent the day researching information on the internet about the criminal case review process. The process was complicated and lengthy, requiring serious evidence and significant financial costs. Rick Davison's testimony was valuable, but insufficient to bring a new case against Omar. By evening, her despair had reached its limit. Laura realized she had reached a dead end. Omar had won again. He had deprived her of her livelihood, isolated her from society, and made her an outcast in her own town. History had repeated itself in every detail. Once again, she had fallen victim to his manipulations. Around 9 o'clock in the evening, Laura arrived at the house on Maple Street. She had no specific plan, she just wanted to see the place where she had once been happy. The house glowed with the warm light of its windows, and 2 cars stood in the driveway. Inside was a family that could have been her family had it not been for betrayal. Matilda was unloading groceries from the car. Emma was helping her, carrying the bags to the house. It was a normal family scene, which Laura watched from her car, parked in the shade of a large maple tree across the street. Around 9:30, Matilda took Emma to a friend's house for the night. Laura watched them drive away in the Honda, leaving the house empty except for Omar, who had returned from work an hour earlier. What happened next remained between Laura and Omar. At 11:47 p.m., neighbors heard screams coming from the Morgan house. Mrs. Jenkins, a 74-year-old retiree who lived next door, later told the police that she first heard male and female voices, then a sound like furniture falling, then silence. Matilda returned home at 11:30. She parked her car in the garage and entered the house through the kitchen door, as usual. The first thing she noticed was the overturned chairs in the dining room and the broken lamp in the living room. Omar was lying on the floor near the sofa. His head was turned at an unnatural angle, and a heavy bronze statuette, a housewarming gift from clients of his construction company, lay next to his body. There were bloodstains on the statuette. Matilda screamed. The scream was so piercing that neighbors in 3 houses heard it. Mrs. Jenkins called the emergency services and ran to the Morgan house, where she found Matilda in shock, sitting on the floor next to her husband's body. Patrol Officer Tommy Henderson was the first to arrive on the scene. The 26-year-old police officer, who had been working in Millfield for only 2 years, had never dealt with a murder before. He cordoned off the crime scene and called for a detective and a medical team, even though it was obvious that Omar Morgan was dead. Detective Michael Rodriguez arrived 20 minutes later. The experienced officer immediately assessed the situation with a professional eye. Signs of a struggle in the living room, the victim's body, the bloody murder weapon. A classic domestic crime, if not for one detail. The front door was unlocked. Matilda was taken to her neighbor's house to give her time to recover before questioning. Emma was left with a friend until morning. The child should not see the crime scene. Rodriguez began a preliminary examination. The statuette weighed about 2 kilograms. The blow was struck from behind and from the side with enough force to cause fatal injuries. Judging by the position of the body and the scattered furniture, there had been a struggle between the killer and the victim. Documents lay on the kitchen table. Financial reports from Omar's construction company. Some pages were scattered on the floor, as if they had been looked at in a hurry. Nothing had been disturbed in the bedroom. Jewelry and money remained untouched. It was not a robbery. At 1 a.m., Rodriguez questioned Matilda at the police station. The 35-year-old woman was still in shock, and her testimony was incoherent. She said she had left the house at 9:30 a.m. to take Emma to a friend's house. Omar stayed home alone, planning to work on some documents and then go to bed. Matilda returned at 11:30 and immediately discovered the body. When asked about her husband's enemies, Matilda responded evasively. She mentioned business rivals and dissatisfied customers, but did not name any specific names. When Rodriguez asked about Laura, Matilda fell silent. "Do you know that your sister returned to town 2 weeks ago?" "I know." "Did she meet with your husband?" "They talked. Several times." "About what?" "About the past. About what happened 14 years ago." Rodriguez recorded her statement, but he could see that Matilda was hiding important information. The trauma of discovering her husband's body was real, but there was something else behind it. Fear, guilt, anxiety. At 2 a.m, the police found Laura. She was sleeping in her car in a gas station parking lot when Officer Henderson knocked on her window. She woke up instantly, a prison habit of always being on guard. "Laura Carson? We need to talk to you." Detective Rodriguez was waiting for her at the station. Laura immediately understood from his face that something serious had happened. "Omar Morgan is dead. He was killed tonight in his home." The news shocked Laura, although she tried not to show it. In prison, she had learned to control her emotions and not let others see her vulnerability. "My condolences to the family." "Where were you between 9 and 11 tonight?" "In my car at the gas station." "Sleeping. Can anyone confirm that?" "I don't think so. The gas station operates automatically after 10. Rodriguez studied her face, trying to figure out if she was telling the truth. Laura remained calm, answered questions directly, and showed no signs of nervousness. But he knew that 14 years in prison could teach her to hide her emotions. "Do you have a motive for killing Omar Morgan?" "I have motives to hate him, but not to kill him." "Had you seen him recently?" "Yes. He threatened me and demanded that I leave town." Laura recounted her attempts to find evidence of Omar's guilt in the 2010 case. She told him about her meeting with Rick Davison, their conversation in the motel parking lot, the threats, and the loss of her job. Her story sounded logical, but it provided a strong motive for revenge. "Are you saying that Omar confessed to you that he framed you 14 years ago?" "Yes." "And you didn't feel the urge to take revenge?" Laura paused, choosing her words. "I wanted justice. But not like this." The interrogation continued until 4 a.m. Rodriguez asked the same questions in different ways, trying to catch Laura in contradictions. She held her ground, her version of events unchanged. By morning, the police had a clear picture of the case. Omar Morgan was killed in his own home between 9:30 and 11:30 p.m. on May 14th. The murder weapon was a bronze statuette from his living room. The prime suspect was Laura Carson, his ex-wife, who had serious motives for revenge. There were no other suspects at this time. On the morning of Wednesday, May 15th, the official collection of evidence began. Forensic experts examined the crime scene, looking for fingerprints, DNA samples, and any clues that could point to the identity of the killer. Omar's fingerprints and those of another person were found on the statuette. The samples were sent to the laboratory for comparison with the database. The results were expected in a few days. Traces of a struggle were found not only in the living room, but also in the kitchen. There were a few drops of blood on the floor near the table and scratches on the wooden surface, as if someone had tried to grab the edge while falling. Neighbors confirmed that they heard screams and sounds of a struggle around 11:45 p.m. Mrs. Jenkins was ready to testify under oath. Rodriguez questioned the employees at the gas station where Laura had spent the night. The surveillance cameras did not cover the entire parking lot, but they showed her car at the gas station at 8:30 p.m. The next shot of her car was taken at 6:15 a.m. the next day. Theoretically, Laura had enough time to get to Omar's house, commit the murder, and return to the gas station. By the end of the day, the evidence against Laura Carson looked convincing. Motive, opportunity, no alibi. Detective Rodriguez was preparing an arrest warrant, awaiting the results of the fingerprint analysis. Laura was released on her own recognizance and forbidden to leave town. She returned to her car at the gas station, realizing she had fallen into the same trap she had 14 years ago. History repeated itself with frightening accuracy. On Thursday morning, all of Millfield was talking about the murder of Omar Morgan. In grocery stores, cafes, and gas stations, people discussed the details of the crime, the killer's motives, and the future of his family. Matilda took a week off work to arrange the funeral and protect Emma from prying eyes. The girl struggled to understand what had happened and kept asking when her dad would come home. Laura became an outcast even among outcasts. People who had previously simply avoided encounters with the former prisoner now looked at her with outright fear. She was refused food at the store and asked to leave the library. The city had become a hostile place for her, where everyone considered her a murderer. On Friday, the results of the examination came in. The fingerprints on the murder weapon belonged to Omar Morgan and Laura Carson. Saturday, May 18th, was a turning point in the investigation of Omar Morgan's murder. Detective Rodriguez received additional forensic results that finally pieced together the picture of what had happened. Blood analysis showed that there had indeed been a struggle in the kitchen. The blood drops belonged to Omar, a small wound on the back of his hand, probably from hitting the edge of the table. The scratches on the wooden surface were fresh, made on the day of the murder. More important was the examination of fabric fibers found under the victim's fingernails. They were gray threads from the jacket Laura had been wearing in recent weeks. Omar had tried to defend himself and left physical evidence of the struggle on his killer. Rodriguez also obtained CCTV footage from nearby streets. One of the recordings, made at 10:15 p.m., showed a figure in dark clothing walking down Maple Street toward the Morgan house. The quality of the recording did not allow for clear identification of the person, but the height and build matched Laura Carson. On Sunday, Rodriguez re-interviewed the prime suspect. Laura looked exhausted after several days of living in her car and constant stress, but she remained steadfast, denying her guilt. The detective listed the evidence against her: fingerprints on the murder weapon, fibers from her clothing under the victim's fingernails, video footage of her presence near the house on the evening of the murder. The evidence seemed irrefutable. Laura was silent for a long time, as if struggling internally with some decision. Finally, she admitted that she had been at the house, but denied the murder. Gradually, under the pressure of the facts and her own weariness from lying, she told her version of the events of that evening. Laura had indeed come to the house around 10 o'clock, when Matilda had already taken Emma away. Omar reluctantly let her in, but agreed to listen to her latest accusations. She told him how she had shown him evidence of his guilt in drug trafficking 14 years ago, how he had laughed at the evidence, claiming that no one was interested in the testimony of a former drug dealer, how he had again demanded that she leave town, threatening to make her life even worse. Laura described how she grabbed a bronze statuette in a fit of rage, wanting to show that she too could threaten him. How the struggle began first in the kitchen, then in the living room. Omar was physically stronger, but she was fueled by 14 years of injustice. Then came a moment of candor, which often happens with criminals under the pressure of evidence. Laura confessed that she had killed Omar. She did it consciously, in cold blood, when she realized that she finally had a chance to restore justice. She told the detective that she had struck Omar fatally on the head with a statuette when he fell to his knees after the struggle. She made sure he was dead. She tried to wipe her fingerprints off the surfaces she had touched, but forgot about the murder weapon. Laura emphasized that she had not planned the murder in advance, but when the opportunity arose, she did not let it slip away. According to her, 14 years of her life were worth Omar's life. Rodriguez understood the psychology of crime. Years of unjust imprisonment, a return to a ruined life, betrayal by those closest to her, all this turned Laura into a person capable of cold-blooded murder. Prison did not reform her, but broke her completely. On Monday, May 20th, Laura Carson was officially arrested on charges of first-degree murder. The charge was based on her own confession, backed up by irrefutable physical evidence. News of the arrest spread throughout Millfield in a matter of hours. The residents' reaction was predictable: relief that the killer had been found, and grim satisfaction that their suspicions had been confirmed. The former prisoner turned out to be exactly who they thought she was. Matilda received the news of her sister's arrest at home, where she was preparing for her husband's funeral. Emma was staying with her grandmother, Omar's mother, who had come from a neighboring state to help the family cope with the tragedy. Detective Rodriguez personally informed her of her sister's arrest and her full confession. Matilda listened to him silently, showing no visible emotion. When he finished his story, she asked only one question: had Laura told the truth about the events of 14 years ago? Receiving confirmation that Omar had indeed been dealing drugs and had framed her sister, Matilda nodded with the expression of someone whose long-held suspicions had finally been confirmed. She confessed to the detective that she had always felt that something was wrong with the story of Laura's arrest, but she didn't want to believe the worst. It was easier to consider her sister guilty than to face the truth about her husband. After the detective left, Matilda sat in the empty house for a long time, reflecting on the events of the past few weeks. For 8 years, her life had been built on lies. Lies about her husband's innocence, lies about the fairness of her sister's sentence, lies that their family happiness had not been bought at the expense of someone else's misfortune. Now the truth was out, but the price was unbearably high. Omar Morgan's funeral was held on Wednesday, May 22nd. About 50 people gathered at the cemetery. Colleagues from the construction business, clients, neighbors, acquaintances. Matilda stood by the grave with 13-year-old Emma, who still had difficulty understanding the reality that her father would never come home again. Laura did not attend the funeral. She was in the county jail awaiting trial on charges of first-degree murder. It was her second prison sentence in less than 30 years of life. After the ceremony, Detective Rodriguez approached Matilda. He was interested in how the family was coping with the tragedy. Matilda replied that Emma was a strong girl and would survive the loss of her father. She was less certain about her own future. Matilda confessed to the detective that she didn't know how to live with what she now knew about her husband. Omar had been a good father and a caring husband, but he had ruined her sister's life, and she, Matilda, had become an unwitting accomplice in that destruction. Rodriguez tried to convince her that she was not responsible for her husband's death, but Matilda felt responsible for his crimes 14 years ago. She should have asked more questions back then, should have been more attentive to the oddities in Omar's behavior. A week after the funeral, Matilda sold her late husband's construction company to one of its competitors. She put a significant portion of the money into a trust fund for Emma's education and gave some to Laura's lawyer to pay for quality defense in the upcoming trial. It was her way of atoning, an attempt to at least partially right the injustice that had weighed on the family for 14 years. In June, Laura Carson's trial began. The trial was relatively short. The defendant did not deny her guilt, so her lawyer focused on proving mitigating circumstances. 14 years of unjust imprisonment, betrayal by those closest to her, despair, and a damaged psyche. All these factors were supposed to influence the verdict. The prosecutor insisted on the maximum punishment, arguing that personal motives and tragic circumstances did not justify cold-blooded murder. In his opinion, Laura Carson was a danger to society and should bear full responsibility for her actions. The jury deliberated at length. They understood Laura's tragedy and sincerely sympathized with her years of suffering, but they could not justify premeditated murder. After all, the law is the law, and personal revenge cannot be an excuse for taking a person's life. The verdict was announced 3 days later, guilty of second-degree murder. The sentence was 15 years imprisonment, with the possibility of parole after 10 years. Laura met the sentence with the same outward calm with which she had listened to her first sentence 14 years earlier. She understood that justice in her case had always been a relative concept, depending on circumstances and interpretation of the facts. Laura Carson returned to prison, this time truly guilty of the crime for which she had been convicted, but guilty of a crime that was the direct result of 14 years of injustice and betrayal. The Carson family's story ended where it began, behind bars. But now Laura knew the truth about the past, and that truth, however bitter and costly, gave her what she had been deprived of for many years: the understanding that justice, albeit distorted and belated, still exists in this world.